Always keep your reader in mind when you're editing your book. Find your niche and write to it. Never forget your target audience. If you're going to be successful as a writer, the market must be your pole star, your El Dorado, your be all and end all. Reader, niche, target audience, market. That's a lot to keep in mind. Particularly because these are four altogether different things. They're often treated as one, so let's try and break this down a little. If you are a writer, then your market is the entirety of the reading world. Any literate soul technically belongs to the market of books, and any literate soul could, in principle, be your reader. Here he is, any literate soul. Your niche is that segment of the market for which your writing is a close fit. That part of the market which most generally accords with the taste and the subject and the genre of your writing. Let's say you write dystopian, goth, sci-fi, fantasy thrillers. Now, it goes without saying that not every reader, neither in your niche nor certainly in the wider market, is going to purchase and read your book. There are two kinds of readers who won't. Those readers who are not now and never will be interested in anything you ever write, and then those who don't know that your writing exists or haven't yet been convinced that they should read it. So we can say that your target audience consists of all the readers in the world, minus all those readers who will never, under any normal circumstances, pick up your book. Put positively, your target audience consists of all of your conceivably possible readers, wherever in the world they may be found. Here are a few of your readers. So your target audience overlaps but is not identical to your niche. Your target audience is wider than your niche but narrower than your market. It includes your dedicated core of readers, your niche, and then any prospective audiences which lie outside of your niche. Now, I would submit that these three categories, market, niche, and target audience, have far less to do with your writing than they do with marketing. Indeed, I would submit the possibly unpopular idea that you can and should concern yourself with all of that only after you have finished writing your book and not while or before you're writing your book. We can take all of this, niche, target audience, and market, and just throw it in the dumpster. Or we can at least put it on the shelf for the moment. But the reader, on the other hand, the reader. That inevitable, invisible reader who's hovering over our shoulder constantly like a kind of buzzard to see just how badly we're getting on. That imaginary reader whose imagined presence is somehow sufficient to banish our creative inspiration and send us spiraling into the doldrums of writer's block. That purely hypothetical reader whose tastes and preferences sometimes mean more to us even than those of our closest relatives and friends, and even in some cases our own. This reader is writing your book with you whether you want him there or not. He's like that guest that you invited over for morning coffee, but then who sticks around for lunch and afternoon tea and even for dinner, despite all of the signs that you are urgently giving him that the party is over. The reader is here to stay, and it's our job to learn to stop worrying and love the reader. All right, but a question in all of this. When we conceive of our reader, to which of the categories we were discussing before does he actually belong? Is he one of your die-hard fans who's liable to eat up your work even if you throw out to the world a steaming pile of garbage? Well, that's not going to help you much. The bar for your revision there is way too low. Or is he, on the other hand, one of those individuals out there in the world somewhere who will never be interested in your work, even if it contains the secret to life, the universe, and everything? That would be the opposite of helpful. The bar there is impossibly high. We can safely say that the reader exists somewhere in the middle of these two extremes, somewhere within the realm of your target audience. But which part? The part that's within your niche or the part that lies outside of your niche? If within your niche, don't you risk limiting your audience a little too much and clipping the wings of your creative project? And if outside of your niche, don't you risk losing sight of that part of your audience which is most likely to purchase and enjoy your book? All right, let's say, just for the sake of a thought experiment, that this hypothetical reader to whose judgment you so regularly defer when you're writing your work exists squarely within your niche. Let's say he is the embodiment of your average reader. So how do you identify what this average reader looks like and what he wants? Well, there's really only one way. You read through all of the things that this average reader is probably reading, and on the basis thereof, you develop an idea of what this average reader expects and desires from literature. So let's say you buy some of the most popular books that are on sale in your niche, which is already an abstraction from the market. And then on the basis of what you read in these books, you try to infer some foggy idea of the kind of character who would actually enjoy and like this sort of book, which is an abstraction from the readership of your niche. So this reader whose opinion is going to tangibly alter the course of your writing itself is really just an abstraction from an abstraction. You are taking as your standard the most astoundingly pallid and mediocre individual that you could imagine, a veritable man with no qualities. And in order to placate the standards of this painfully run-of-the-mill individual, you're going to simply mimic some of the most prominent features of the books that you suppose him to be reading. Well, I hate to break this to you, but that is a recipe for boring, stilted, and commonplace writing. And it is a recipe followed by literally none of the most beautiful, influential, or even best-selling books out there on the market. Such books always in some way take the market by storm. They forge new paths on well-trodden ground. They open new vistas to their readers' astonished vision. Indeed, they actually create new readers, new niches, and even new genres entire, where none existed before. Let's take a book that I have always especially detested, The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Apologies to any Dan Brown fans out there. What can I say? There's no accounting for taste, and so I can't be held accountable for anyone else's bad taste. Of course, I'm only joking. I choose this work on purpose because it could easily be taken as a crass crowd pleaser. The sort of book which deliberately takes as its ideal reader the most average of all possible readers imaginable. But here's the thing. Dan Brown's brilliance actually consisted in writing a book which had no real antecedents and which no existing niche could easily absorb. It was a little bit thriller and a little bit historical drama and a little bit art criticism and a little bit wildly conspiratorial anti-Catholic screed. It wound all of these diverse and seemingly incompatible threads into a single, fairly unique braid. Before it hit the market, one could have been easily forgiven for supposing that there would be very few readers for such an ungodly melange. A great many editors and publishing houses evidently came to the same conclusion. Dan Brown spent many years being bounced around between various publishers before finally striking gold with the Da Vinci Code. And if he had been writing for what he might have supposed was the average reader of any particular audience or niche, he certainly would have written a very different book, and one that would have procured him far less fame and fortune. Or again, consider Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, or the writings of Jules Verne. Or let's go back to the origins, to the first novels that were ever written, the works of Cervantes, or Madame de Lafayette, or Daniel Defoe. None of these authors were writing to an existing audience, because their audiences only existed after they had created them. The list goes on and comprises every possible genre, from Joseph Heller to Jack London, from Douglas Adams to Edgar Allan Poe. None of these authors was writing for some average reader. None of these writers was writing to fill a niche. But neither were they writing for themselves, as we also sometimes hear. A writer who is writing for himself can afford to presuppose or take for granted any number of things that he's going to have to make explicit if he hopes his writing to be understood and read by anybody else. His strictly personal writing is bound to be obscure and opaque to anyone who doesn't intimately know him, and maybe even to some who do. Consider the published diaries or journals or epistolary of great writers. How many explanatory footnotes and preparatory essays are required in order to make the meaning of these things plain to uninformed readers? With their published work, on the other hand, they wrote in an entirely different way. They wrote with some kind of a reader in mind. But they wrote for a reader that they themselves had to produce. They were cultivating an entirely new readership as they went. So here's the really interesting thing. Your reader is not a real reader somewhere out there in the world right now. He is an invention, a fictional being, a kind of character in your story, but external to the same. He is the unwritten part of your own writing. So with this, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that you can stop chaining your writing to the tyrannical and unarticulated opinions of some faceless critic out there. The bad news, however, is that you are responsible not only for creating all of the stories and the worlds in your book and all of the characters that are going to populate it, but also the ideal reader who is going to appreciate the same. You yourself must forge a clear idea of the kind of reader that you want to bring up in the world. You are going to be educating your readers in how to read your work through your work. From the point of view of our revisioning process, you can think of it like this. You are tasked with imaginatively fabricating a perspective outside of your writing, and then gazing back on your own writing from that point of view. But otherwise, you have to invent a character somewhere in the world, and then converse with him about what you're writing. So here, in summary, is what we're going to do. We're going to substitute the neutral view of the editor with the interested view of an extra-textual character that we ourselves have made. And then we're going to come at our revision in a kind of pincer motion, working at once from the innermost core of our work and from this projected external perspective. This is the revision process in a nutshell.
But John,
I hear somebody saying in growing panic,
it's hard enough to even draft a piece of work in the first place. And now you expect us to look at this draft from two perspectives simultaneously? How in the world are we going to accomplish that?
Well, I am delighted that you should ask such a question, my dear fellow writer, for as it happens, I have developed a clear progressive method for approaching this problem Precisely. But before we come to that, it is imperative that you spend due time trying to develop a lucid view of your model reader. So I'm simply going to ask you to write a new character for your story, only a character who stands outside of your story, a character who is going to read, profit from, and enjoy your story, and who's going to help you revise it. Now, the trick here is that you have to invent a credible and easily imaginable character. It can't just be, meet my imaginary friend George, he adores my writing. No, George is a die-hard fan, and as we've already noted, that is the worst possible gauge that you can bring to bear on your revisioning process. George will let you get away with anything and everything, even the murder of your own writing. We want a critical reader, not an accomplice in literary crime. So let's see how this might actually practically look. I want you to think for a moment of Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is another example of an author who had to invent his entire audience. Before him, the entire genre of detective fiction was practically negligible in the fiction market. So what might a model reader of Sherlock Holmes' adventures actually look like? How might Sir Arthur Conan Doyle have answered this question as he was setting out to write the first of his Sherlock Holmes stories before a set public for them ever existed? Well, his reader is intelligent and clever, and he likes to solve riddles. He likes to be given concrete clues to these riddles so that he can try to beat Watson in anticipating the conclusions of the master detective. But he also doesn't like things to be given away too cheaply. The same thing is true about the psychology of the characters that he's attracted to. He enjoys being given hints about their deep motivations, their inner worlds, their secret struggles, but without everything being handed to him on a platter. He likes to work for revelation. He's a person of refined literary taste. He likes a well-crafted and an elegantly written story. He has, or at least appreciates, an Englishman's sense of social propriety. He's a person of culture. He grasps and enjoys literary allusions and historical reference. He likes intellectual suspense, but he's not in it for crude thrills. He likes intellectual downtime almost as much as the rise to the plot's climax, which he also doesn't always expect to be spectacular or shocking. He likes an unexpected twist, even after he's solved the crime. He has a subtle, somewhat dry sense of humor. He likes stories about good gaining the upper hand over evil, but he's also not naive about society's seedy underbelly, and he's not so much a Puritan that he expects his characters or his resolutions to be flawless. He's willing to read many shorter works centered on a single character, each one of which independently is shorter and simpler than a novel, but all of which, taken together, are much longer and more complex. He's willing to follow a series which is released over a long period of time. He is a serial reader, a loyal adherent to any author that he feels is worthy of his prolonged attention. And he's willing to read fiction that lies outside of the beaten and conventional paths. Much more could be said, but you get the idea. This model reader satisfies three criteria. First of all, he is exacting. Bearing him in mind will help a writer to write better. Second of all, he is appeasable. His standards, though high, can be met and even exceeded. And finally, he is a reader who could well exist in the world. There are innumerable individuals who possess these traits or something similar. There are potentially boundless numbers of such readers who don't even know that the books fit to them actually exist. And there are many readers who could be taught to enjoy writing just like this. So I think that you can begin to see how supposing a reader like this could be very helpful to you in your course as a writer and as a revisioner. This invented individual, this model reader, is actually a frame of reference for understanding what audience you are really aiming at, your true target audience in the world. Only that, rather than taking some vague and amorphous idea of a person who's somewhere out there in the world, you've actually encapsulated all of these characteristics into a concrete, identifiable, and envisionable person with whom you can actually dialogue and whose insights and ideas you can really put to use. Of course, it's comparatively easy to identify the model reader for a famous writer's books.
Elementary, my dear Watson. Purely elementary.
The trick is in doing this for your own writing, so I want you to give it a try. Sit down with a blank piece of paper and write through a thorough description of your model reader as if he were a character in a story. Imagine writing a short story in which this character sits down at a table in a coffee shop with your book in hand and begins to read it and walks away with a smile. What kind of reader is he? Use your own experience as a reader, as well as your knowledge and your artistic intuition of human psychology to help you here. What traits does he have? How would you describe his character? What expectations does he have about the things he reads? What are his likes and his dislikes, his literary preferences? What kind of writing grabs him? What is his view and his taste of literary style? What genres is he particularly drawn to, and why? What hooks him and brings him into a story? What bores him, leaves him dry, drives him away? What kinds of works does he enjoy? Short ones, long ones, compilations, series? Does he like epics or realistic writing? Does he like symbolism or impressionism? Make your vision of him as complete and as clear as possible. If you want, give him a face, a voice, physical traits, a name. The more realistically and particularly you can envision him, the easier he's going to be to work with. Remember, you're envisioning a kind of co-author here, somebody who's going to sit down with you and is going to give you useful advice and counsel at every stage of the writing and the revisioning process. So really, make him as complete and realistic as you can. If nothing else, this is going to be a good exercise in character building. And when you finally finished, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. Is your reader exacting? Will he compel you to write constantly better, to hone your work to the high standards of his taste and expectations? But is he also appeasable? Can you meet or even exceed his standards and expectations? And finally, is he possible? Can you reasonably expect to find readers like him in the world, in sufficient numbers to meet your intentions with your project and to reach the breadth of readership that you are actually personally seeking? If the answer to any of these questions was no, or if you're not entirely sure, then it's back to the drawing board. Return to your reader and rework him until you're satisfied that these criteria have been met, and abundantly met. And if you want, take him for a trial run. Sit down and start to edit through your work with him by your side and try to imagine what he might tell you about his experiences there, how he might receive the things that you're writing, what feedback he might give you. If this is already helping you with your revisioning, then that is great. You're on the right track and you're going to have no problem with what we're going to do next. But if, on the other hand, you find that this doesn't quite come naturally to you or you have doubts or problems with it, not to worry. Next time, I'm going to introduce you to a method that I've developed for taking these twin elements, that is to say, the core of your writing and the model reader of your writing, and putting them to work for you in the process of revisioning and constantly refining your work. I'm going to give you access to what I call the writer's wheel. This is a schema that I've developed which will help you to revision your work in both senses. That is to say, it will help you see your work from a new perspective and from a new light, and it will also help you with the actual revising of your work step by step, moving through it layer by layer in a very methodical and clear and rigorous way, but a way which is also inspiring and engaging as we go. And so, until then, farewell. And as the Italians say, buon lavoro, which means happy working. I hope you've enjoyed this video, which is part of the new site self-editing course for fiction writers. If you would like to gain access to the supplementary material for this course, you can sign up for it for free at the link in the description. This material includes written work for each section of this course, along with several explanatory notes. If you sign up, you will also have the chance to schedule a free consultation call with me to discuss your writing and your self-editing. I'd love to learn about any projects you're working on and to give you feedback from my perspective as a lifelong writer and a long-time professional editor. I hope to talk to you soon.